Hey all, Father Jim Haney from St. Paul's in the Plains in Lubbock and Texas Tech, Canterbury. I'm standing here on the campus of Abilene Christian in front of a sculpture called Jacob's Dream. If you remember the story from the book of Genesis, Jacob is on the run. He has cheated his brother Esau out of his inheritance, and Esau has made some threats against him, and so Mom has decided it's best to ship Jacob off to an uncle that lives up in what we would call northern Syria or Iraq. And so Jacob is on the run, and back in those days, God was a pretty localized thing. God was a God of an area. We think of God as being the God of the universe, but they thought much more restrictedly. God was a God of a territory and of a tribe and of a people. And yet as Jacob is traveling to Haran on the run, in one sense he's leaving home behind, but in another sense he's leaving the area of his God behind. And yet in a place that he would later name Bethel, the house of God, he lays down, puts his head on a rock, and has a vision, a dream that night of a ladder, or maybe more precisely a stairway to heaven, ladder to heaven, and the angels of God ascending and descending on it, just out there in the middle of nowhere. And it's a sign to Jacob that God is active and God is present, not just back where Mom and Dad are, but even out in a place called Bethel. He names the place Bethel, house of God, as a reminder of God's presence that night for him. The Celtic Christians, our Celtic ancestors in the faith, have a word for a place where God seems especially present. The Celts called that a thin place, a place where God seems even more present. They would say that God is never more than this far from you, about 3 feet, but in some places you perceive that distance between you and God is even less. And Bethel for Jacob certainly was a thin place. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had thin places where I've experienced God's presence more closely. I think of the old camp, the conference center where I used to go as a kid. That was a thin place. Oftentimes a church is a thin place. At times St. Paul's very much seems a thin place. I feel God's presence especially there. But I also feel a thin place sometimes with certain gatherings, certain groups, certain communities of God, when we gather for prayer, when we gather for worship, when we gather at the altar for the Holy Eucharist. That too can be a thin place. And so God is never further away than this, but sometimes God's presence seems even closer. And I would encourage you to reflect on the thin places in your lives and seek God out. No matter where you are, God is always present. God is always there, even in strange places that you might not expect. Jacob never expected to find God in Bethel, but he did find him. And he set up a place there, and later, many decades later, would return to that place as a reminder of that night, that encounter he had with God's angels being active, even out in the middle of nowhere. So with that thought, I will leave you. God bless and have a wonderful day.